The grand lobby of Ashford Tower shimmered under cascading white lights on Christmas Eve. 300 guests mingling beneath a 20-foot Douglas fir adorned with 5,000 LED bulbs that cast golden warmth across Italian marble floors. The scent of pine and cinnamon mixed with expensive perfume champagne flutes catching reflections of Manhattan's skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. Marcus Reed moved through the crowd almost invisibly, his gray work shirt faded from too many washes, calloused hands still bearing traces of grease from fixing a heating vent on the 15th floor that morning. At 36, he carried himself with quiet dignity that most people overlooked. They saw the janitor, the maintenance worker who fixed their toilets and changed their light bulbs. They didn't see the artist whose fingers once danced across concert hall stages, whose name had briefly appeared in regional papers as a rising talent before everything fell apart 12 years ago in a single moment of collapsing metal and crushed bone. His daughter, Sage, clung to his hand, her 7-year-old frame practically vibrating with excitement. Her dark curls bounced as she tugged him toward the dessert table, brown eyes wide with wonder at the chocolate fountain that stood taller than she was. Marcus watched her with the kind of love that made his chest ache, fierce and protective and tinged with guilt that he couldn't give her the childhood she deserved. No expensive dresses from boutiques on Fifth Avenue, no private schools with manicured lawns. Just a cramped apartment on East 118th Street, where the radiator clanked at night and the stairwell smelled like old cooking oil and 48 steps separated them from the street below. Across the hall on this mezzanine level, Victoria Ashford surveyed her domain with the practiced poise of someone born to command rooms. At 34, she had transformed her father's struggling real estate firm into Ashford Holdings, a juggernaut of commercial development that now owned 40% of the city's prime waterfront property. Her honey-blonde hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, and the crimson dress she wore demanded attention, without apology, a bold V-neck that made her impossible to miss among the sea of corporate blacks and grays. But it was her eyes that truly arrested people. Ice blue and calculating, they seemed to measure every person, every angle, every potential weakness or opportunity. Most found her intimidating. Some called her ruthless, no one called her soft. Yet beneath the armor of her designer wardrobe and cutting boardroom reputation, Victoria carried a wound that had never fully healed. 17 years ago, when she was 18 and still believed in fairy tales, she had fallen in love with a boy named Ethan Cross. He was a piano prodigy, all wild dark hair and passionate eyes, the kind of talent that made audiences forget to breathe when he played. He had written her a song just for her alone. He called it Eternal Echo, and he played the opening 8 bars for her one night under a sky full of stars at their summer music camp, whispering that when he finished it, the melody would hold everything he felt but couldn't say in words. 3 weeks later, Ethan died in a car accident on a rain-slicked highway outside Lenox, Massachusetts. The song died with him, incomplete, a promise that would never be kept, or so Victoria believed. She never heard those notes played again, had forbidden herself from listening to music the way she once had, treating it instead as background noise in elevators and hotel lobbies, afraid that if she let herself feel too deeply, the grief would swallow her whole, the way it almost had in the months after Ethan's funeral, when she couldn't get out of bed and her father had threatened to send her to a psychiatric facility upstate. Sage's bright voice cut through Victoria's thoughts. The child had somehow wandered away from her father and was now standing near the dessert table, reaching for a chocolate-covered strawberry that sat just beyond her grasp on a silver platter. As she stretched on tiptoes, her foot slipped on something wet. Champagne, probably spilled by a careless guest who'd had 3 glasses too many. She went down hard, her knee cracking against the marble floor with a sound that was small but sharp enough to cut through the ambient noise. The impact was immediate. Blood seeped through her white tights, spreading in a dark stain that made the injury look worse than it was. Sage's face crumpled, tears flooding her eyes as pain registered in her 7-year-old mind that didn't yet understand the difference between serious hurt and temporary sting. Marcus was across the room in seconds, his body moving on instinct honed by years of single fatherhood. He dropped to his knees beside his daughter, pulling a clean handkerchief from his pocket, with the practiced efficiency of a man who always carried one for moments exactly like this. His voice was low and soothing as he pressed the cloth gently to her scraped knee, the kind of voice that could calm storms brewing in a child's heart. Sage's sobs quieted to hiccups as he held her, his broad hand cradling the back of her head the way he had when she was an infant screaming through her first fever. But before Marcus could lift her to carry her to the restroom to properly clean the wound, a man's voice sliced through the moment like a blade through silk. Damian Blackwood strode over his tailored navy suit, immaculate, his jaw tight with irritation that someone would dare disrupt his networking conversation with two Goldman Sachs executives he'd been courting for 6 months. Damian was Victoria's fiancé, or rather the man her father had chosen for her to marry in 6 weeks when winter gave way to early spring. He was handsome in a catalog model way, with perfectly styled chestnut hair, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes, the kind of smile that came from years of practice in front of mirrors and board members who needed to be convinced that, yes, this man could be trusted with their money. He worked in private equity at Blackwood Capital and spoke frequently about optimizing assets and maximizing shareholder value in a tone that made it clear he viewed most things, including people, as items on a spreadsheet with columns for cost and benefit. The words came out sharp and cutting. "Can you control your child? This is a corporate event, not a daycare. If you can't afford a babysitter, maybe you shouldn't have brought her." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level, measured, the way he'd learned to do over 3 years of working in this building, where one wrong word could mean unemployment and eviction. "She's 7. She slipped. It was an accident." Damian's eyes raked over Marcus's work clothes with undisguised contempt, the kind of look that said everything about what he thought of people who worked with their hands for $15 an hour. "An accident that wouldn't have happened if you knew your place, your maintenance. There's a staff entrance for a reason." Sage's bottom lip trembled, and something in Marcus's chest cracked, a hairline fracture in the dam he'd built to contain 17 years of accumulated grief and 12 years of swallowed rage and 7 years of exhaustion, from raising a daughter alone after her mother had walked out when Sage was 6 months old, leaving nothing but a note that said she wasn't cut out for this life. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but another voice cut in first. A woman's voice that carried the kind of authority that made 300 people stop mid-conversation and turn to look. Victoria Ashford descended the mezzanine stairs with deliberate grace, each step measured and purposeful, like a chess grandmaster who'd already calculated the next 8 moves. When she reached them, her ice-blue eyes fixed on Damian with a coldness that could frost windows in July. The words came quietly but with steel beneath. "You don't have the authority to speak to my employees that way." The room had gone silent, everyone watching this drama unfold like spectators at a gladiator match. Victoria let the silence stretch for 3 seconds, long enough for discomfort to settle in Damian's shoulders. Then came the command, spoken with finality: "Apologize." Damian's face flushed red, the color creeping up from his collar to his hairline. "Victoria, I was just..." She cut him off with surgical precision. "Apologize now." Damian's lips pressed into a thin line, but he managed a clipped response directed more at the floor than at Marcus or Sage. "Sorry." Victoria turned to Marcus then, and for just a moment her expression softened in a way that surprised her as much as it surprised the people watching. She saw the way he held his daughter, the care in his touch, the protective fury barely restrained in his shoulders. She saw something that felt dangerously close to recognition, though she couldn't name why. This man she'd never really looked at before tonight. This maintenance worker who she passed in hallways without acknowledgement suddenly seemed to occupy 3 dimensions instead of 2. Her voice came gentler now, almost kind. "Take care of your daughter. The first aid kit is in the executive lounge, 5th floor. Take the private elevator." She gestured toward the brass doors behind her desk, the ones that required a key card, and went directly to the executive floors where people like Marcus weren't supposed to go. Then she did something that made Damian's jaw clench visibly. She pulled a business card from the small clutch purse she carried and held it out to Marcus. "My direct line, if you need anything." Marcus took the card with fingers that trembled slightly, his throat too tight for words. He managed a quiet, "Thank you, Ms. Ashford," before lifting Sage into his arms and carrying her toward the elevator. Victoria stood watching them go, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. Something about the way Marcus moved, the careful gentleness in how he held his injured daughter, triggered a memory she couldn't quite grasp, like a word on the tip of her tongue or a melody half-remembered from childhood. By the time Marcus and Sage returned an hour later, the child's knee properly bandaged with Hello Kitty Band-Aids that Margaret Sullivan kept in her desk drawer for emergencies. The party had grown louder and more reckless. Someone had opened the piano, a vintage Steinway Model D that usually sat covered and silent in the corner, more decorative than functional. A few employees had gathered around it, laughing and requesting songs from a tipsy accountant who knew 3 chords and played them with more enthusiasm than skill. Sage tugged Marcus toward the instrument, her injury already forgotten in the resilient way of children, who haven't yet learned to hold grudges against the world. "Daddy, can you play, please, just one song so I can sleep?" Marcus hesitated, his body tensing at the thought of sitting at a piano in front of people who might judge, who might remember what he used to be and see only what he'd become. He hadn't played publicly in years, not since the accident 12 years ago that had shattered more than his hand. It had broken something in his soul, made him afraid to touch the keys in front of anyone who might recognize that his technique was no longer flawless, that there were passages he could no longer execute the way conservatory training had taught him. But Sage's eyes were so hopeful, filled with that particular 7-year-old faith, that fathers could do anything, and it was Christmas Eve and she'd been so brave about her scraped knee. How could he say no to the only person in the world who still believed he was capable of magic? He sat down at the piano and the crowd quieted with curiosity, replacing their chatter. His fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, trembling slightly as doubt whispered all the reasons this was a mistake. Then muscle memory took over, the kind that lived in bone and sinew regardless of what conscious thought said. He began to play. The melody that filled the hall was unlike anything most of them had ever heard outside of concert recordings. It started gentle, like rain on glass in a summer storm. Each note placed with such precision and care that it felt less like music and more like a conversation whispered in the dark between 2 people who knew each other's secrets. Then it grew, swelling into something achingly beautiful, a cascade of sound that spoke of longing and loss and a love so deep it had no words, only notes that trembled in the air like held breath. Marcus's eyes closed as he played, shutting out the watching faces and the judgment he feared. His damaged hand, scarred from where the stage rigging had crushed it 12 years ago at Apollo Theater, during what should have been his debut performance, moved with grace that defied its injury. The scar tissue stretched across his palm and up his wrist, a reminder written in skin of the moment everything changed. But he'd learned to compensate using techniques most pianists never needed to master, thumb-over movements and adjusted fingerings that let him play passages that should have been impossible with nerve damage and limited range of motion in his 4th and 5th fingers. He played from memory, from the marrow of his bones, every note a piece of his heart laid bare on the keys. The opening 8 bars were bright and hopeful, written in C major with the kind of melodic clarity that made listeners lean forward unconsciously. This was the part Ethan Cross had composed 17 years ago, young and in love, and believing that music could express what words couldn't. Then came the transition. Marcus had written the 16 bars that shifted to a minor and slowed the tempo, introducing harmonic complexity that turned hope into something more bittersweet. This was the section he'd created alone in a practice room at Berkshire Academy after Ethan had come to him frustrated, saying he'd started something beautiful but didn't know how to finish it. Marcus had taken those 8 bars and heard in them the continuation that Ethan couldn't find, had spent 3 nights working out the progression that would honor what Ethan had started while taking it somewhere deeper. The final 12 bars brought resolution, returning to C major but with added seventh chords that gave the brightness a melancholic edge. This was the part Marcus had written after Ethan died sitting at a battered upright piano in his mother's basement, while she slept upstairs pouring his guilt and grief into notes. Because he couldn't speak the words out loud to anyone, couldn't confess that he was the one driving when the truck crossed the center line, that he'd chosen to swerve right to save himself, and in doing so had sent Ethan to his death. Victoria Ashford had been preparing to leave, standing near the coat check with her Burberry trench draped over one arm when the music reached her. She froze mid-step, her hand gripping the coat so hard her knuckles turned white. The melody wrapped around her like a ghost, pulling her back through 17 years to a summer night when stars seemed close enough to touch. And a boy with dark eyes had played 8 bars of this exact song for her under the Tanglewood lawn tent. Eternal Echo. Ethan's song. Ethan's gift to her, the last piece of him she had left buried so deep in her memory that she'd convinced herself she might have imagined its beauty over the years. That grief had polished it into something more perfect than reality. But she hadn't imagined it. Every note was exactly as she remembered from that night when Ethan had played the opening and promised he'd finish it before summer ended, before they had to go back to their separate lives in different cities. Every pause, every aching phrase, the way the melody climbed and fell like a question being asked and answered. Except Ethan had never finished it. She knew this because Dr. Leonard Hayes, their mentor at Berkshire, had told her months after the funeral that Ethan died with the piece incomplete, 8 bars of brilliance that would never have a proper ending. So how did this stranger, this maintenance worker whose name she barely knew, play the complete version? How did he know the exact continuation that should have been Ethan's but never was? Victoria's vision blurred as tears she hadn't cried in years burned behind her eyes. Her chest constricted, each breath a labor that required conscious effort. Around her guests murmured appreciation, oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath her feet had just shattered into pieces she didn't know how to reassemble. She descended the stairs on unsteady legs, drawn to the piano as if magnetized. Her expensive heels clicked against marble, but she barely heard the sound over the roaring in her ears. Marcus finished the song and opened his eyes to find the CEO standing 3 feet away. Her face pale as winter snow, her blue eyes swimming with unshed tears that threatened to spill over. The question came out raw, barely above a whisper. "Where did you learn that?" Marcus stood slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs with the force of a prisoner trying to break free. He'd known this moment might come someday, had dreaded it, and longed for it in equal measure for 17 years. Every choice he'd made since Ethan's death had been designed to avoid this confrontation, to keep his secret buried where it couldn't hurt anyone, especially not the woman Ethan had loved more than music or ambition or his own life. The lie came automatically rehearsed from years of telling it to himself. "It's just an old melody, something I picked up years ago." Victoria's voice sharpened, desperation creeping into her tone like cracks in ice. "Don't lie to me. That song was written for me by someone who died 17 years ago. No one else knew it. No one could have known it." She stepped closer, searching his face for answers he wasn't ready to give her. Breath coming faster as panic and grief and confusion warred in her chest. "Who are you?" Before Marcus could respond, Sage appeared at his side, sleepy and smiling, oblivious to the tension crackling between the adults. "That was beautiful, Daddy. Can we go home now?" Victoria's gaze dropped to the child, then back to Marcus. She saw the fear in his eyes, the way he instinctively moved to shield his daughter from her intensity. The CEO in her wanted to demand answers, to use her authority and resources to excavate every secret this man carried. But the human part of her, the part that remembered what it felt like to lose someone so completely that the world went gray for years afterward. That part recognized the look of someone protecting what they loved most. She forced herself to breathe, to step back, to remember where she was and who she was supposed to be. Her voice came steadier now, controlled. "We'll talk about this soon." It wasn't a request. It was a command from someone accustomed to being obeyed. Marcus gathered Sage's coat with hands that shook his mind, already calculating how long it would take to pack their apartment where they could go. How far he'd have to run before Victoria's resources couldn't find him. He'd done it before, leaving everything behind to start over. He could do it again if it meant protecting his daughter from the messy truth of who he was and what he'd done. As they hurried toward the exit, Victoria stood rooted to the spot, the melody still echoing in her skull like a hymn or a curse. She didn't sleep that night, lying awake in her penthouse at the Pierre as snow fell silently against floor-to-ceiling windows. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan's face, heard his voice promising her forever in notes instead of words. But now another image kept intruding, superimposing itself over her memories like a double exposure photograph. The maintenance worker's scarred hands moving across the keys, the sorrow etched into the lines around his eyes. The way he'd held his daughter like she was the only thing in the world worth protecting. Who was Marcus Reed, and how had he stolen a piece of her past? The next morning, Victoria arrived at her office 2 hours early, the December sun still hiding below the horizon. She pulled Marcus Reed's employee file and spread the contents across her desk like evidence at a crime scene. The information was sparse, frustratingly so. Hired 3 years ago as maintenance staff. No college degree listed. Previous employment at a warehouse from 2018 to 2021, a grocery store. Before that, odd jobs scattered through the years like breadcrumbs leading nowhere useful. Emergency contact listed as none except for Sage Reed, age 7 daughter. No mention of a wife or partner, no parents or siblings, just a vast emptiness where a support system should have been. The file said nothing about music, nothing about talent, nothing that explained how a man working night shifts, fixing toilets and changing fluorescent bulbs could play like someone who'd trained at Juilliard or Curtis. Someone who understood not just the mechanics of piano technique, but the soul of musical expression. Victoria picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in over a decade. The voice that answered after 6 rings was groggy with sleep. "Dr. Hayes, it's Victoria Ashford. I need to speak with you today. It's about Ethan." Corbin Hayes arrived at her office that evening, a lean man in his late 50s with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes obscured by wire-rimmed glasses that had been fashionable in the 90s and never updated. He'd been Ethan's mentor, the one who'd recognized the boy's genius when Ethan was 14 and nurtured it through years of conservatory training until the accident stole him away and left a hole in the classical music world that never quite filled. Victoria hadn't spoken to Dr. Hayes in over a decade, the connection too painful when every conversation inevitably circled back to Ethan and what might have been. But when she called, he came without question, taking the train down from Lenox, where he still taught at Berkshire Academy. She played him a recording she'd found online, uploaded to a private social media group by someone at the party. The video quality was poor, shot on a phone from across the room, but the audio captured enough for someone with trained ears to analyze. Dr. Hayes listened in silence, his expression unreadable as decades of teaching had taught him to mask his initial reactions until he'd fully processed what he'd heard. When the video ended, he removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes in the gesture of a man who'd just witnessed something that complicated his understanding of history. His voice came measured, careful. "That's remarkable. May I ask who performed it?" Victoria leaned forward, her elbows on the polished walnut desk. "Is it Eternal Echo, the piece Ethan wrote for me?" Dr. Hayes hesitated, choosing his words with the precision of someone who knew how much weight they carried. "It's the same melody, yes. But Victoria, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you 17 years ago but didn't because I thought it would hurt you more than help." Victoria's pulse quickened, her fingers interlacing to keep them from trembling. "What?" Ethan didn't finish that song. He wrote the opening, the first 8 bars, and they were brilliant. He always was. But he got stuck. He couldn't figure out where to take it. He was frustrated, kept scrapping versions, starting over. Staying up until 3 in the morning. Trying different progressions that never felt right. The room tilted slightly and Victoria gripped the edge of her desk. "What are you saying?" Dr. Hayes continued, his voice gentle but firm. "There was another student at camp that summer. quiet kid, enormously talented but overlooked because he didn't have Ethan's charisma or family connections. Ethan asked him for help. The other student took those 8 bars and completed them, turned them into something extraordinary. But then Ethan died and the song became his legacy, and I never corrected the record because I thought it would dishonor his memory to say someone else had contributed to his final composition. Victoria felt nauseous, her carefully constructed understanding of the past dissolving like sugar in water. Who was the other student? I don't remember his name, it's been so long. He didn't fight for credit, didn't make a fuss. When Ethan died, he just disappeared. I heard he left music entirely, went home to wherever he came from, and never returned to the conservatory world. Victoria's hands clenched into fists on her desk, her perfectly manicured nails biting into her palms. Marcus Reed, the man who played last night, could it have been him? Dr. Hayes looked at the frozen frame of the video on her laptop screen, at Marcus's face illuminated by the reading light on the piano. I don't know. Maybe. But there's only one way to find out. He paused, then added quietly, ask him. But asking Marcus proved more difficult than Victoria anticipated. He didn't show up for his next shift or the one after that. When she finally sent Patrick O'Brien, head of security, to his listed address on East 118th Street, they found the apartment empty. The landlord, a Scottish woman named Dorothy Campbell, who'd owned the building for 30 years, said Marcus and his daughter had left 3 days ago, paid their rent through the end of the month, and disappeared without a forwarding address. Victoria felt panic claw at her chest, a sensation she hadn't experienced since she was 18 and got the phone call about Ethan's accident. She'd driven him away with her questions, her intensity, her desperate need for answers. But why? What was he hiding, or more accurately, what was he protecting? The answer came on a night when snow fell thick and heavy, blanketing the city in white slints that muffled car horns and sirens. Victoria had been working late, trying to distract herself from the gnawing emptiness that Ethan's song had reopened inside her. She was about to call her driver when she heard piano music drifting up from the lobby, faint and haunting and unmistakable. She took the stairs instead of the elevator, her heels clicking on marble as her breath came too fast. The lobby was empty except for a single figure seated at the piano. Marcus sat with his back to her, his shoulders hunched as if bearing an invisible weight that had been pressing down for years. He played Eternal Echo again, but this time it sounded different, sadder, more resigned, like a confession rather than a gift. Victoria's voice cut through the final notes. You came back. Marcus's hands stilled on the keys. He didn't turn around, couldn't face her yet. I shouldn't have run. Sage asked me why we left and I couldn't give her a good answer. She liked it here, liked the cookies Margaret gave her, liked watching the lights. He paused, his voice dropping lower. I owed you the truth even if you hate me for it. Victoria moved closer, her footsteps deliberate. I could never hate you for playing beautifully, but I need to understand. That song, Eternal Echo. Ethan Cross was supposed to have written it for me before he died, but Dr. Hayes told me Ethan didn't finish it. Someone else did. She stopped directly behind him, close enough to see the silver threading through his light brown hair, the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights and too much worry. Was it you? Marcus finally turned to face her. Up close, she could see his eyes were gray-green, the color of the Atlantic in November, and they held hers without flinching, even though fear and regret warred in their depths. The confession came simply, yes, it was me. Victoria's knees nearly buckled and she gripped the edge of the piano to steady herself. Why would you do that? Why would you let him take credit? Marcus's answer came with the weight of 17 years behind it. Because he loved you, and I was nobody, just some kid who played because he had to, not because he was destined for greatness like Ethan was. I was at that music camp on a scholarship I could barely afford, working nights, washing dishes at a diner just to pay for bus fare there and back. He laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the empty lobby. And then I saw you. You probably don't remember, why would you? I was invisible, another scholarship kid in the back row. But I watched you laugh with Ethan, watched the way your eyes lit up when he played, and I thought that's what love looks like. That's what it means to matter to someone. I wanted to give you something even if you never knew it came from me. Victoria whispered, her voice breaking. So you wrote a love song for another man to give to me? Marcus corrected her gently. I wrote a love song for you. Ethan just delivered it. He knew I had feelings I couldn't express. He wasn't cruel about it. He offered to tell you the truth, but I said no. I told him you were meant for someone like him, someone brilliant and confident and whole, not someone like me. The tears Victoria had been holding back finally spilled over, tracking down her cheeks in silent streams. And then he died. Marcus echoed the words like a prayer or a curse, and then he died. And I let the song be his legacy because it made you happy, because it gave you something to hold on to. And I went home and tried to forget that I'd ever been anyone other than what I am now. Victoria's next question came softer, but no less important. What happened to you? Dr. Hayes said you were talented. Why are you fixing pipes instead of playing concert halls? Marcus held up his right hand, turning it so she could see the scars that webbed across his palm and up his wrist, like a roadmap of pain. The tissue was raised and shiny in places, puckered in others where surgeons had tried to reconstruct what the accident had destroyed. 3 years after that summer, I signed a contract with a performance company. Your father's company, actually, Ashford Productions. It was supposed to be my big break, my debut at Apollo Theater with a program of Chopin and Rachmaninoff. During rehearsal, stage rigging collapsed. I pushed a cellist out of the way and got my hand caught. By the time they pulled me out, the bones were crushed. 3 surgeries later, the doctors said I'd never play professionally again. Victoria's blood turned to ice as understanding crashed over her like a wave. My father's company. Marcus nodded, his voice matter-of-fact in the way of someone who'd made peace with injustice. The investigation concluded it was cost-cutting measures gone wrong. Someone approved substandard equipment to save money. The company settled quietly with everyone involved. I got enough to cover my medical bills, barely. Then the contract was terminated and I was adrift. So I learned to fix the things that break. Seemed fitting. The pieces fell into place in Victoria's mind with sickening clarity. Her father, Richard Ashford, had always been ruthless in business. But this destroying someone's entire future to save a few $1,000s on equipment was beyond ruthless. It was monstrous. Her voice came out strangled. Did you know? When you took this job here, did you know who I was? Marcus admitted quietly. Not at first. I needed work, any work, and the pay was better than the warehouse. But then I saw your name on the directory and I wondered. And then I saw you and I knew. He met her eyes directly. I stayed because I'm a coward. Because seeing you from a distance was better than not seeing you at all. Because every time I fixed a leak or changed a light bulb in this building, I could pretend for a moment that I was close to the life I should have had, even if I could never actually live it. Before Victoria could respond, before she could process the magnitude of what he'd just revealed, the lobby doors burst open. Damian Blackwood strode in, his face flushed with anger, followed by 2 men in expensive suits. Behind them came another figure Victoria recognized immediately, a man whose presence she'd been dreading and expecting in equal measure. Richard Ashford entered the building he used to own, carrying himself with the same imperious bearing that had defined his 30-year reign as CEO before Victoria took over and pushed him into advisory retirement. His silver hair was slicked back, his charcoal suit impeccable, but his eyes held nothing but contempt as they landed on Marcus. The words dripped with disdain. So it's true, my daughter has been sneaking around with the help. Victoria's spine straightened, instinct overriding shock as she positioned herself between Marcus and her father. The last time Richard Ashford had entered this building was 8 months ago, when the board voted to remove him from all operational decisions after his attempt to block Victoria's Brooklyn acquisitions. He'd left threatening lawsuits that never materialized, his influence eroding with each quarter that proved Victoria's strategy superior to his outdated methods. Richard's voice cut through the marble lobby with practiced authority. "What are you doing here? This building is private property." Victoria's response came ice cold. "I'm the CEO. I can meet with anyone I choose, anywhere I choose. You, however, are trespassing." Damien stepped forward, playing his role in whatever script he and Richard had rehearsed. "Victoria, we need to talk about this rationally. Flynn called me when he saw you leave the restaurant early. He was worried, so he contacted your father." The lie was transparent enough to be insulting. Victoria's assistant, Margaret, had mentioned seeing Damien and Richard having lunch together at the Four Seasons 2 weeks ago, a detail that hadn't seemed significant until this moment when the conspiracy revealed itself in the angry flush on Damien's face and the calculated coldness in her father's eyes. Richard moved closer, his voice dropping to the tone he'd used throughout Victoria's childhood, when explaining why she couldn't have dance lessons or art classes or any pursuit that didn't serve his vision of grooming an heir. "I raised you better than this. That man is a nobody, a failure who couldn't make it as a musician, so he cleans toilets for a living. And you're throwing away a marriage alliance that would secure our family's position for generations." The possessive pronoun hit Victoria like a slap. "Our family," as if she were still an extension of his ambition rather than a separate person who'd spent 6 years building something far more successful than anything he'd achieved. Marcus stood slowly, his body language shifting from defensive to something harder, more resilient. Years of being dismissed and diminished had taught him when to retreat and when to stand his ground. This moment required the latter. His words came quiet but firm. "I think you should leave, all of you. Ms. Ashford and I were having a private conversation." Richard laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. "A private conversation, is that what we're calling it when the janitor seduces the CEO? How much are you asking for? 50,000, 100 men like you always have a price." Victoria's hand shot out, palm up, in a gesture that silenced her father mid-sentence. "Enough. You will not speak to him that way. You will not speak to anyone in my building that way." Damien tried a different approach, his voice softening into what he probably thought was reason. "Sweetheart, I know you're going through something. The stress of the Brooklyn deal, the wedding planning, but you need to think about what you're doing. This man is using you. People like him see people like us as meal tickets." The condescension in people like him and people like us made Victoria's jaw clench. She'd heard variations of this rhetoric her entire life from her father, from board members, from the social circle, that treated wealth as evidence of moral superiority. The assumptions they made about Marcus, based solely on his job title and bank balance, revealed more about their character than his. Victoria's voice came steady, each word deliberate. "Marcus hasn't asked me for anything. In fact, he ran away to avoid exactly this conversation. I'm the one who demanded answers about a song that's haunted me for 17 years. Richard seized on this admission like a predator spotting weakness. "A song! You're risking everything over a song. This is exactly why I never should have let you take over the company. You're too emotional, too soft, making decisions based on feelings instead of logic." The accusation was familiar, one he'd leveled countless times whenever Victoria showed empathy for struggling tenants or funded community programs that didn't maximize immediate profit. But hearing it now in front of Marcus and Damien and the security cameras recording every word crystallized something that had been building for years. Victoria turned to face her father, fully, her voice dropping to match his earlier tone. "You want to talk about logic? Let's discuss the logic of cutting safety budgets by 40% to boost quarterly earnings. The logic of using substandard equipment that crushed a 24-year-old pianist's hand and ended his career. The logic of paying him $85,000 when his projected lifetime earnings would have been over $2 million. Richard's face paled, genuine surprise flickering across features that rarely showed authentic emotion. How did I find the files? I'm the CEO. I have access to everything, including sealed settlement agreements from Ashford Productions before you bankrupted it." I know exactly what you did 12 years ago. I know you personally approved the vendor that caused Marcus's accident. The revelation hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Damien's expression shifted from righteous anger to confusion as he processed information clearly outside his script. Richard's hands clenched at his sides, his businessman's mask cracking to reveal something uglier underneath. His voice turned vicious. That accident was unfortunate but legal. We followed all protocols, paid appropriate compensation. If he'd actually had talent, he would have found a way to succeed despite the injury. Instead, he's here mopping floors, which tells you everything you need to know about his real capabilities. Marcus flinched as if struck, and Victoria watched 17 years of accumulated pain and self-doubt flash across his face. This was what he'd internalized, the story he'd told himself about his own failure, validated now by the man who'd caused it. But before Marcus could retreat into that familiar shame, Victoria's voice cut through with surgical precision. He had more talent at 24 than most concert pianists develop in a lifetime. Dr. Leonard Hayes told me Marcus was one of the most naturally gifted students he'd ever taught. The only reason he's not performing at Carnegie Hall is because you chose profit margins over human safety. She turned to Damien, her engagement ring suddenly feeling like a shackle on her finger. And you, were you part of this from the beginning? Did my father recruit you, or did you volunteer to be his puppet? Damien's face flushed crimson. I don't know what you're talking about. Your father and I have a professional relationship, nothing more. The lie was so transparent it almost deserved respect for its audacity. Victoria pulled her phone from her clutch purse and opened the email Margaret had forwarded earlier that day. The one she'd been too focused on finding Marcus to fully process. The message contained an audio file sender anonymous with a timestamp from 2 weeks before Christmas. She hit play and Damien's voice filled the lobby, tinny through phone speakers but unmistakable. You're certain she'll agree to the marriage? Victoria's stubborn. Richard's voice responded with casual confidence. She'll agree because I'll show her she has no choice. My contacts at the SEC are ready to investigate 3 of her Brooklyn acquisitions. If she doesn't cooperate, anonymous tips will leak to the Wall Street Journal. Damien again, eager and grasping. And after the wedding, I'll have 25% control of Ashford Holdings per the prenuptial agreement. Richard's confirmation came matter-of-fact. Correct. You'll become the 2nd largest shareholder. Together, we'll force Victoria out of the CEO position. She's good at making money, but she lacks the ruthlessness for long-term power. The company needs leadership that understands sacrifice. The recording ended, silence crashing down like a physical weight. Damien's face had gone from red to white, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Richard maintained his composure better, but his eyes had narrowed with calculation as he tried to determine who'd recorded the conversation and how much damage control would be required. Victoria's voice came cold enough to freeze nitrogen. Margaret forwarded this to me 6 hours ago. I've spent the afternoon with Jennifer Mitchell, my attorney, reviewing options. She assures me the prenuptial agreement is void given that it was negotiated under fraudulent pretenses. She also mentioned that conspiracy to commit securities fraud carries a federal sentence of up to 20 years. Damien found his voice, though it came out strangled. That recording is illegal. New York is a one-party consent state. Whoever recorded it was one of the parties in the conversation, Victoria finished, which means it's perfectly admissible. Margaret is very thorough about these things. The implications settled over Damien like a net. His carefully constructed plan, months of courting Victoria while secretly plotting with her father, had collapsed in under 5 minutes. His fund managed over $500 million in assets, but federal fraud charges would destroy that empire faster than any market crash. Richard tried to regain control, his voice hardening. You're making a mistake, Victoria. Damien brings resources and connections that would benefit the company. This recording proves nothing except that 2 businessmen discussed a mutually beneficial arrangement. Mutually beneficial for everyone except me, Victoria shot back. The daughter you were planning to manipulate out of her own company using SEC investigations you'd orchestrate through your old Yale connections. She pulled the engagement ring from her finger, the 3-carat diamond catching lobby lights as she held it out to Damien. "The engagement is over. You'll receive formal notice from my attorneys tomorrow, along with a strongly worded suggestion that you retain counsel who specializes in federal securities law." Damien didn't take the ring, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides as the magnitude of his situation crystallized. His career, his reputation, possibly his freedom. All balanced on whether Victoria decided to press charges or simply expose him as a fraud who'd tried to marry into power he couldn't earn legitimately. The ring clattered against marble as Victoria let it drop, the sound echoing in the vast space like a gavel striking a verdict. Richard's mask cracked completely, rage pouring through. "You ungrateful child. Everything I built, everything I sacrificed was for you, to give you opportunities I never had, and this is how you repay me, by humiliating me in front of hired help." Victoria's laugh came harsh and humorless. "Everything you built for yourself. I was just the heir you needed to carry on your legacy. You never asked what I wanted, never cared that maybe I dreamed of something other than balance sheets and acquisition strategies." She gestured at Marcus, who'd remained silent through the entire confrontation. His posture tense, but his expression carefully neutral. "This man wrote one of the most beautiful pieces of music I've ever heard. He gave it away because he thought someone else deserved credit more than he did. He works 2 jobs to support his daughter, teaches piano to kids who can't afford lessons, and never once complained about the injustice you inflicted on him 12 years ago." Her voice rose, fury finally breaking through professional control. "You want to know who has character worth respecting? It's not the men in $1,000 suits making backroom deals. It's the man who gets up at 5 in the morning to fix broken pipes so other people can have hot water, who carries Band-Aids in his pocket for his daughter, who plays piano like an angel despite nerve damage that would have made lesser people quit." The words hung in the air, and Victoria realized she'd just defended Marcus more passionately than she'd ever defended herself. The truth of what she'd said settled into her bones with uncomfortable clarity. This wasn't just about correcting her father's past wrongs or escaping an arranged marriage. Somewhere between hearing Eternal Echo played complete for the first time and watching Marcus cradle his injured daughter, something had shifted in her understanding of what mattered. Richard's voice turned cutting, designed to wound. "You think he's noble? He's been lying to you for 3 years, working in your building, watching you from shadows, nursing some pathetic obsession with a woman he could never have. That's not nobility, that's delusion." Marcus spoke for the first time since the confrontation began, his voice quiet but steady. "You're right. I should have quit when I realized who she was, but I needed the job and I told myself I could keep distance, that it didn't matter. I was wrong." He turned to Victoria, his gray-green eyes holding regret, but also something harder, more resolute. "I'm sorry for the deception, even if it was unintentional at first. I'll resign effective immediately. You won't have to see me again." The finality in his tone triggered panic Victoria didn't expect. After everything that had just happened, after the revelations and confrontations and demolished futures, the thought of Marcus simply walking away felt unacceptable in a way she couldn't articulate. Her response came urgent. "No, you're not resigning." Marcus's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Ms. Ashford, I can't work here anymore. Not after this." "You're not resigning?" Victoria repeated, her mind racing through possibilities. "Because I'm offering you a different position. Director of the Ashford Music Foundation, a new charitable initiative I'm establishing to provide music education scholarships for underprivileged children." The offer emerged fully formed from some place in her subconscious that had been assembling pieces she hadn't consciously recognized. The foundation made strategic sense, providing tax benefits while addressing genuine community needs. But the real reason crystallized in Marcus's stunned expression, in the way hope flickered across his features before doubt smothered it. She needed him to stay, not as the invisible maintenance worker she'd ignored for 3 years, but as someone whose talent and kindness deserved recognition. needed it with an urgency that had nothing to do with business strategy and everything to do with the dangerous feeling blooming in her chest. Richard laughed, the sound bitter. Now you're creating charity positions for your pet projects. This is exactly why the board should remove you. Emotional decisions based on guilt and misplaced sympathy. The board supports me, Victoria countered. I have 22% ownership after purchasing shares from the Employee Pension Fund last quarter. You have 12%. Even if you convinced every other shareholder to vote against me, which you can't, you'd still lose. She'd been quietly consolidating power for months, buying shares through intermediaries, building alliances with board members who appreciated her vision over her father's scorched earth tactics. The pieces had been in place before tonight, but she'd never intended to deploy them quite so dramatically. Richard's face darkened with understanding. His daughter had outmaneuvered him using strategies he'd taught her to dismantle the control he'd assumed was permanent. You planned this, the share purchases, the attorney consultations. How long have you been plotting to push me out? Since you tried to block my Brooklyn expansion, Victoria admitted. Since you went behind my back to board members suggesting I was too inexperienced for the CEO position. Since I realized you'd never respect any decision I made unless it aligned perfectly with your vision. Father and daughter stared at each other across the marble lobby, years of dysfunction and disappointment, compressed into a single moment of mutual recognition. They'd been heading toward this confrontation since the day Victoria turned 18 and Richard had presented her with a 5-year plan for her life that included business school, a suitable marriage, and eventual succession to his empire. She'd followed the plan for years, believing compliance would earn the approval that never came. Ethan's death had been the first crack in that compliance, a grief so profound it couldn't be scheduled or managed. Richard had viewed her mourning as weakness, had pushed her back toward productivity before she'd properly processed the loss. The resentment from that pressure had been festering for 17 years, and now it erupted in the form of calculated rebellion. Richard's next words came calculated to inflict maximum damage. If you do this, if you choose this path, you're no longer my daughter. I'll contest your ownership percentage, tie the company up in litigation for years. I'll make sure every business publication knows you destroyed your family over a janitor. Victoria's response came without hesitation. Then do it. But know that the moment you file, I'll release every document related to the Ashford Productions safety violations. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly how you cut costs at the expense of human lives. Your reputation won't survive the scrutiny. The threat was mutual destruction, and both of them knew it. Richard could damage Victoria's position, but she could annihilate his legacy. Transform him from respected businessman to cautionary tale about corporate greed. The question was, who would blink first? Marcus stepped forward, his voice cutting through the standoff. Stop, both of you, stop, I'm not worth this. He looked at Victoria with something like desperation. I appreciate the job offer, but I can't be the reason you destroy your relationship with your father. I can't be the reason your company gets dragged through litigation. Sage and I will leave New York. You'll never have to think about me again. The self-sacrifice in his tone, the assumption that his presence was inherently damaging, triggered something fierce in Victoria. She'd spent her entire life watching people be discarded when they stopped being useful to her father's ambitions. She wouldn't do the same to Marcus, especially when his only crime was surviving an accident that should have been prevented. Her voice came firm. You're not leaving, and this isn't about you, not really. This is about me finally making decisions based on what I believe is right rather than what's strategically optimal for maintaining family peace. She addressed her father directly. You taught me that business requires tough choices and personal sacrifice. Fine. I'm making a tough choice. I'm choosing integrity over convenience, truth over reputation management. If that means litigation and bad press, so be it. At least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror. Richard's expression hardened into something cold and final. Then we have nothing more to discuss. My attorneys will contact you Monday morning. He turned and walked toward the exit, his posture rigid with fury and wounded. Damien hesitated, caught between following Richard and attempting some last-ditch appeal to Victoria. When her expression remained granite hard, he chose retreat, practically running after her father like a child afraid of being left behind. The lobby fell silent after they departed, tension draining away slowly like water from a punctured tire. Victoria's knees felt weak and she sank onto the piano bench, adrenaline crash hitting with physical force. Her hands trembled as she processed what had just happened. In the span of 20 minutes, she'd ended her engagement, declared war on her father, and offered a job to a man she barely knew, but couldn't stop thinking about. Marcus remained standing, his expression unreadable. "You didn't have to do that, any of it. I know. Your father will make good on his threats. He'll tie you up in court for years, cost the company millions in legal fees. Probably. And all because I played a piano song." Victoria looked up at him, seeing properly for the first time the man who'd been invisible in her building for 3 years. Not because of the song, because of what it revealed about who I've been versus who I want to be. She stood, her composure returning as she shifted into problem-solving mode. "But you're right that we need to address practical realities. Where are you and Sage staying? The apartment on 118th Street? Marcus shook his head. "I gave up the lease when I thought we were leaving permanently. We're at a motel in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. My old roommate from Berkshire has a cabin there he lets me use sometimes." The image of Sage sleeping in a cheap motel while her father tried to protect her from adult complications made Victoria's chest tighten. "Come back to New York. There's a corporate apartment in this building, 35th floor. It's empty right now. Stay there while we sort out next steps." Marcus's pride visibly warred with practical necessity. "I can't accept charity. It's not charity. Consider it part of your employment package as foundation director. The position comes with housing allowance. We're just implementing it immediately rather than waiting for paperwork." The rationalization was thin, but Marcus seemed too exhausted to argue further. He nodded slowly, acceptance and resignation mixing in his expression. Victoria pulled out her phone and texted Margaret, who, despite the late hour, responded within 30 seconds. Her assistant was efficient to the point of supernatural, always available when needed. "Margaret will have keys ready in 20 minutes. The apartment is furnished and stocked with basics. Tomorrow we'll deal with retrieving your belongings from storage and enrolling Sage in school." The practicalities grounded them both, providing structure when emotional reality felt too overwhelming to process. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that revealed his exhaustion. "I should call Sage. She's with my friend Thomas, probably asleep by now, but she worries if I don't check in." "Use my office," Victoria offered, gesturing toward the elevator. "Top floor. There's a private line if you need privacy." Marcus hesitated, then accepted, disappearing into the elevator while Victoria remained in the lobby. She picked up the engagement ring from where it had fallen, 3 carats of carefully selected diamond. That represented everything she'd been willing to accept because it seemed logical and appropriate. Damien had checked all the boxes her father valued: right family, right education, right connections. What he'd lacked was authenticity, genuine care for anything beyond his own advancement. She dropped the ring in a trash receptacle next to the security desk, the gesture both petty and satisfying. Patrick O'Brien, head of security, emerged from his office, having clearly witnessed the entire confrontation through surveillance monitors. "Ms. Ashford, do you want me to file a trespassing report for Mr. Ashford Sr. and Mr. Blackwood?" Victoria considered it, then shook her head. "Not yet. Let's see if they actually follow through on their legal threats before we escalate further." Patrick nodded, his Irish accent thick with approval. "For what it's worth, I've worked here 15 years under both you and your father. You're the better boss, the better person. What you did tonight took guts." The unexpected support steadied something in Victoria that had been wavering. She'd grown so accustomed to isolation at the top, to making decisions without emotional backup, that simple validation felt significant. When Marcus returned 20 minutes later, he found Victoria sitting at the piano, not playing but running her fingers over the keys like reading Braille. "How's Sage?" Worried but trying to be brave about it, she asked if we're in trouble if we have to keep running. "What did you tell her? That sometimes standing still is braver than running, that we're going to try something different." The words resonated with Victoria's own situation. The choice to stop running from uncomfortable truths about her father, her relationship patterns, her carefully constructed emotional defenses. Margaret appeared with keys and a folder of information about the apartment, her professional demeanor giving no indication that it was nearly midnight or that she'd just witnessed her boss's life implode. 35th floor, Unit H. "I've arranged for grocery delivery tomorrow morning with basics for a 7-year-old. There's a Target nearby for anything else you need immediately." Marcus accepted the keys with visible gratitude. "Thank you. I know this is unusual." Margaret allowed herself a small smile. Ms. Ashford specializes in unusual. It's why working for her is never boring. After Margaret departed, Victoria walked Marcus to the elevator, suddenly uncertain about protocol for this situation that defied normal professional boundaries. "The foundation job offer was genuine. I know tonight was chaotic, but I've been considering something like this for months. Music education in underserved communities aligns with corporate social responsibility goals while providing measurable community benefit." She was retreating into business language, creating distance from the emotional vulnerability of the past hour. Marcus seemed to recognize the deflection but didn't call it out. His response came measured. "I'd be honored to help build something like that, but I need you to understand I'm doing it because I believe in the mission, not because I expect anything else." The clarification hung between them, both necessary and slightly painful. He was setting boundaries, making clear this wasn't manipulation or romantic opportunism, just a man accepting a job that aligned with his skills and values. Victoria nodded. "Understood. We'll keep things professional." Even as she said it, she knew the promise was complicated by everything that had already passed between them. You couldn't learn someone carried a 17-year secret about a song that defined your youth, couldn't watch them defend their dignity against powerful men who tried to diminish them, couldn't feel your heart rate spike every time they looked at you, and then simply categorize them as professional colleague. But they could try. They could both try to build something structured and appropriate from the chaos of this night. The elevator doors opened and Marcus stepped inside, his hand holding them from closing. "Victoria, thank you for believing me, for defending me. No one's done that before." The use of her first name without title or formality created intimacy that professional distance couldn't quite erase. She managed a response. "You deserved better than what my father did to you. I can't undo 12 years of injustice, but I can make sure the next chapter is different." The elevator doors closed on his grateful expression, and Victoria stood alone in the lobby that had witnessed multiple small destructions tonight. Her engagement, her relationship with her father, her carefully maintained emotional armor, all demolished in the name of truth and integrity. She should have felt devastated or at least uncertain about the massive life changes she'd just initiated. Instead, she felt lighter than she had in years, as if shedding the weight of expectations and obligation had freed something essential that had been compressed for too long. Monday morning arrived with the inevitability of consequences, winter sun struggling through cloud cover that matched Victoria's mood. She'd spent Sunday drafting foundation bylaws with Jennifer Mitchell, reviewing Richard's likely legal strategies and avoiding the 35th floor where Marcus and Sage had settled into the corporate apartment. Professional distance required space, even when every instinct pulled her toward checking if they needed anything, if Sage liked the groceries Margaret had ordered, if Marcus had slept at all or spent the night staring at ceiling tiles the way Victoria had. Jennifer arrived at Victoria's office carrying 3 banker's boxes filled with documents. "Your father filed at 8:01 this morning. Petition to dissolve your stock purchases on grounds of fiduciary misconduct, claiming you used insider information to manipulate share prices." He's also filed for emergency injunction to freeze all foundation funding pending investigation into whether you're misappropriating corporate assets for personal benefit. The speed was impressive, even by Richard's aggressive standards. He'd clearly spent the weekend strategizing with attorneys who specialized in scorched earth litigation, the kind who billed $800 per hour and viewed ethics as negotiable obstacles. Victoria scanned the petition Richard's accusations laid out in formal legal language that transformed her decisions into criminal conspiracies. This won't hold up. Every stock purchase was approved by the board, documented through proper channels, and the foundation hasn't received any funding yet, so there's nothing to freeze. Jennifer set down her coffee, her expression serious. Legally, you're right, but your father isn't playing for legal victory, at least not initially. He's playing for public perception and strategic delay. If he can make the foundation look corrupt before it launches, he damages your credibility. If he can tie up the stock purchases in litigation, he creates uncertainty that depresses share value and makes board members nervous. The strategy was vintage Richard Ashford, using the legal system not for justice, but as weapon to punish disobedience and reassert control. Victoria had watched him deploy similar tactics against business rivals. Landlords who complained about building conditions, journalists who wrote unfavorable articles. The difference was, this time his target was his own daughter. Her response came cold. Then we go nuclear. Release the Ashford Productions safety violation files to the press, make him defend cutting corners that destroyed Marcus's career. Public opinion will turn fast when they see he's attacking me for trying to correct his past wrongs. Jennifer hesitated, her professional mask slipping slightly. Are you sure once that information goes public, there's no taking it back? Your father will be destroyed, your family name associated with corporate negligence. It'll affect you too, guilt by association, even though you weren't involved. Victoria thought about Marcus teaching piano to kids at Harlem Community Center, using lunch breaks from his $15 per hour job to give free lessons to children whose families couldn't afford instruments or private instruction. Thought about Sage asking if they had to keep running, 7 years old and already learning that safety was temporary, that people in power could disrupt your life on whims. Her voice came steady. Release it. My father made his choices 12 years ago. I'm making mine now. Jennifer nodded and pulled out her phone, texting instructions to her firm's media relations team. Within hours, documents would reach major outlets, carefully curated to tell the story Jennifer had crafted. Young CEO confronts family legacy of corporate malfeasance, establishes foundation to help victims of father's cost-cutting measures. The narrative framed Victoria as reformer rather than traitor, though Richard would undoubtedly spin it differently through his own media connections. The first articles appeared online by noon business reporters who'd been cultivating relationships with Jennifer's firm for years. Jumping on an exclusive that had everything: family drama, corporate corruption, the David versus Goliath element of injured musician taking on real estate empire. By 2 p.m., Richard's attorneys had issued a statement calling the allegations baseless character assassination. But the damage was done. Social media amplified the story, particularly the detail about Marcus's crushed hand and aborted concert career, transforming him into sympathetic figure against Richard's villain. Victoria watched the news cycle unfold from her office, stomach churning despite knowing this was necessary. Destroying her father's reputation felt less like victory than Pyrrhic triumph, winning the battle while losing something essential about who she'd thought she was. Ruthlessness came easier when directed at strangers, in boardrooms harder, when the target was family, however dysfunctional. By Wednesday morning, the board meeting loomed like referendum on Victoria's leadership. She arrived early, reviewing presentation materials that demonstrated Ashford Holdings' continued success under her direction. The numbers told irrefutable story: revenue up 23%, profit margins improved, tenant satisfaction scores at all-time high. Multiple awards for sustainable development practices. The 8 board members filed in at 9 sharp, their expressions ranging from supportive to concerned to calculatedly neutral. Harrison Whitfield III, her father's oldest ally, took his seat with the air of man attending funeral rather than quarterly review. Victoria began without preamble. I assume you've all seen recent media coverage regarding my father's legal action and the circumstances surrounding the Ashford Music Foundation. Before we discuss Q4 results, I want to address those issues directly. She pulled up a slide showing the Ashford Productions safety violation timeline documents Jennifer had compiled from files Richard thought were permanently sealed. In 2012, my father approved cost-cutting measures at Ashford Productions that resulted in substandard stage equipment being installed at Apollo Theater. This equipment failed during rehearsal, causing severe injury to a 24-year-old pianist named Marcus Reed. The company settled quietly for $85,000, a fraction of Mr. Reed's projected lifetime earnings. Whitfield interrupted. Ms. Ashford, with respect, dredging up decade-old business decisions from a defunct subsidiary seems irrelevant to current company operations. Victoria's smile was sharp. It's relevant because my father is accusing me of misappropriating corporate assets to benefit someone with whom I have inappropriate relationship. But the foundation exists specifically to correct historical injustices like the one inflicted on Marcus Reed. Hiring him as director isn't nepotism, it's restitution. She advanced to the next slide showing Marcus's credentials. Mr. Reed graduated from Berkshire Summer Music Academy in 2007 with highest honors. His mentor, Dr. Leonard Hayes, described him as one of the most talented pianists he'd trained in 30 years. After the accident that ended his performance career, Mr. Reed continued teaching music to underprivileged children on a volunteer basis while working full-time to support his daughter. He is uniquely qualified to run a foundation focused on music education access. The board members absorbed this information with varying degrees of acceptance. 3 of them, younger executives Victoria had recruited over the past 2 years, looked convinced. 2 others, older holdovers from her father's era, remained skeptical. The remaining 3 seemed to be calculating which side would ultimately prevail. Victoria pressed her advantage. My father claims I'm emotionally unstable, making rash decisions under stress. Let's examine that claim against actual performance data. She launched into Q4 presentation numbers and graphs demonstrating Ashford Holdings' continued dominance in Manhattan commercial real estate. The Brooklyn acquisitions Richard had opposed were already generating revenue above projections. Tenant retention rates had improved under management practices that prioritized long-term relationships over short-term profit maximization. Every metric pointed to company thriving under her leadership. By the time she finished, even Whitfield looked grudgingly impressed. The younger board members were openly supportive, asking questions that gave Victoria opportunities to elaborate on successful strategies. The vote on Richard's petition to freeze foundation funding went 7-1 in Victoria's favor, with only Whitfield dissenting. The vote on Richard's motion to investigate her stock purchases went 6-2, Whitfield joined by another older member who'd apparently calculated that opposing Victoria was futile, but symbolic resistance would protect relationships with Richard. It was enough to let Victoria maintain control while giving Richard's allies face-saving out. After the meeting adjourned, one of the younger board members approached Victoria privately. Your father called me last week, suggested I should start looking for new leadership opportunities if I wanted to advance my career. Implied that you wouldn't last the year as CEO. I told him the only leadership crisis I saw was his inability to accept that his daughter surpassed him. The support steadied Victoria more than the vote had. Thank you. I know Richard can be persuasive, make disloyalty seem like prudent business strategy. He's scared. That's why he's lashing out so aggressively. Scared that you're proving his entire business philosophy wrong, that compassion and profit aren't mutually exclusive. Men like him can't admit when they're wrong, so they attack anyone who highlights the wrongness. The analysis rang true. Richard had built his empire on belief that business required ruthlessness, that caring about human cost was weakness that competitors would exploit. Victoria's success while maintaining ethical standards invalidated his worldview, threatened the narrative he'd built to justify decades of decisions that prioritized money over morality. Marcus texted around 2. Sage wants to know if you'd like to join us for dinner tonight. Nothing fancy, just pasta at the apartment. She's worried you're not eating properly. The invitation filtered through 7-year-old concern made Victoria smile genuinely for the first time that day. She considered declining, maintaining professional distance, before realizing professional distance was facade they'd already shattered. Pretending otherwise served no purpose except protecting her from vulnerability she'd been avoiding for 17 years. Her response, "I'd love to. What time?" Marcus's reply came quickly. 6:30, and Victoria, congratulations on the board vote. Margaret told me you crushed it. At 6:15, Victoria changed from her business suit into jeans and cashmere sweater, the most casual outfit she'd worn to any non-yoga activity in years. The corporate apartment on the 35th floor was decorated in generic elegance, Ashford Holdings hospitality suite for visiting executives who needed temporary housing during extended business. Marcus answered her knock wearing faded jeans and a Berkshire Music Academy t-shirt that had clearly survived since his student days. The logo cracked and peeling. Seeing him in casual clothes instead of maintenance uniform or formal attire created different impression, younger and more relaxed, despite stress lines around his eyes. Sage launched herself at Victoria the moment she entered. "You came, Dad made his special sauce with the secret ingredient. I'm not supposed to tell you what it is, but it's cinnamon." Marcus laughed, ruffling his daughter's hair. "So much for secrets. Come in, dinner's almost ready." The apartment smelled like garlic and tomatoes, domestic scents that Victoria's penthouse never contained. Despite having a full kitchen she rarely used. She followed Sage to the dining table, already set with mismatched plates that Marcus must have purchased at Target, since the corporate suite only provided bare necessities. Dinner was chaotic in ways Victoria didn't know meals could be. Sage talked constantly, bouncing between topics with 7-year-old logic that made narrative sense only to her. She described her new school, PS 290 on the Upper East Side, where she'd started Monday, and already made 3 best friends. She demonstrated the dance routine her class was learning for spring recital. She asked Victoria approximately 40 questions, ranging from favorite color blue to whether she'd ever petted a dolphin. No. Marcus orchestrated the chaos with practiced ease, redirecting Sage when she got too energetic, prompting thank yous. When Victoria complimented the pasta, gently steering conversation away from topics like why she and Marcus's mother weren't together anymore. Watching father and daughter interact revealed dynamics Victoria had never witnessed in her own childhood. Richard had viewed parenting as project management, scheduling quality time, the way he scheduled board meetings and measuring success through achievement metrics. Affection had been conditional approval earned through performance. The easiness between Marcus and Sage, the way they communicated through inside jokes and casual touches, demonstrated entirely different understanding of family. After dinner, Sage insisted Victoria help her build a Lego castle, the kind of activity that required floor sitting and tolerance for pieces scattered everywhere. Marcus cleaned dishes while Victoria and Sage constructed towers and battlements according to 7-year-old architectural vision that defied structural logic. At 8:30, Sage started rubbing her eyes despite insisting she wasn't tired. Marcus swept in with practiced bedtime routine, carrying her to the bedroom while she protested that she wanted to stay up and talk to Victoria more. Victoria stood preparing to leave and give them privacy, but Marcus returned quickly. "She wants you to say goodnight. You've been promoted to important person status, which means goodnight hugs are mandatory." In the bedroom, Sage was tucked under covers printed with cartoon unicorns, her earlier energy transformed into sleepy contentment. "Will you come to dinner again? Maybe Friday. Dad's making tacos and I get to help." Victoria's chest tightened with unexpected emotion. "I'd like that very much." Sage's arms wrapped around her neck in fierce hug that smelled like children's toothpaste and strawberry shampoo. "Good, because you seem sad a lot and dinner makes people less sad. It's science." The 7-year-old wisdom delivered with such certainty made Victoria laugh, even as her eyes stung with tears. She returned the hug carefully, aware this small person was offering something precious without knowing its value. After Sage settled in to sleep, Marcus and Victoria returned to the living room. The television played muted in background, some cooking competition that provided visual noise without demanding attention. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, careful distance that felt more significant than when they'd been separated by CEO-employee hierarchy. Marcus broke the silence. "Thank you for being kind to her. Sage doesn't warm up to people easily, trust issues from her mother leaving. But she's decided you're safe, which is the highest compliment she gives. She's remarkable, resilient and empathetic in ways most adults never achieve. She's had to be resilient. I try to shield her from adult complications, but kids absorb more than we think they do. She knows we struggled financially, knows her mother chose to leave rather than be a parent, knows that stability is something you work for rather than assume." The pain beneath his matter-of-fact tone revealed wounds that hadn't healed despite years of single parenting. Victoria recognized the parallel to her own childhood, different circumstances but similar lesson, that people you should be able to count on sometimes failed in fundamental ways. Her voice came soft. "You're a good father, Marcus. Better than you probably recognize. Sage is lucky to have you." He looked at her with gratitude and something deeper, something that made the air between them feel charged. "I'm trying to be the parent I needed when I was her age, trying to make her feel secure even when everything else is uncertain." The moment stretched, weighted with things neither of them were saying. Victoria felt the pull toward him like gravity, the desire to close the distance between opposite couch cushions and see what happened if they stopped maintaining careful boundaries. Her phone buzzed with text from Jennifer marked urgent. "Your father just got Helen Cross to agree to give a statement. She's claiming you manipulated her into supporting your narrative about Marcus. Press conference scheduled for tomorrow at 10. The words hit like physical blow air, leaving Victoria's lungs in rush. Helen Cross, Ethan's mother, the woman who'd called her just days ago offering blessing and support, had apparently been convinced or coerced into undermining everything Victoria had built. Marcus noticed her expression change. "What's wrong?" She showed him the text, watching his face pale as he processed implications. When he spoke, his voice carried devastation. "This is my fault. Everything he's throwing at you traces back to me. I should have stayed gone, should never have come back." "No," Victoria's response came fierce. "This is my father showing exactly who he is when someone refuses to be controlled. This is what he does to people who threaten his power." But even as she said it, doubt crept in. Maybe Richard was right that she'd let emotion override judgment, that hiring Marcus and creating the foundation were reckless decisions that exposed the company to unnecessary risk. Maybe her desire to correct past injustice had blinded her to present vulnerabilities. Marcus stood pacing with agitation. "I need to resign, distance myself from you and the company so there's no basis for these accusations. If I'm gone—" "If you're gone, my father wins," Victoria interrupted. "He gets to punish us both for defying him, and no one learns that his business practices have real human costs." She stood too, matching his intensity. "I'm not letting you sacrifice yourself to protect me. We face this together or not at all." The declaration hung between them, commitment that exceeded professional alliance. Marcus searched her face, looking for certainty she wasn't sure she felt, but refused to let him see her doubt. His next words came barely above whisper. "Why are you doing this? Risking everything for someone you barely know?" Victoria moved closer, closing distance until they stood inches apart. "Because the deepest wounds in life come from not being brave when it matters. Because I've spent 17 years playing it safe and all it got me was emptiness. Because when I hear you play piano or watch you with Sage or listen to you talk about giving kids opportunities you didn't have, I remember what it feels like to believe in something beyond profit margins and strategic positioning." Her hand found his fingers interlacing. "And maybe because some part of me recognized you the moment I heard eternal echo complete. Recognized the person who loved me enough to give me beauty without asking for credit, who's been carrying guilt that isn't his, who deserves someone willing to fight for him the way he's fought for everyone else." Marcus's free hand came up to cup her face, thumb, brushing her cheekbone with gentleness that contradicted years of manual labor. Victoria, I'm terrified of this. Terrified I'll ruin your life the way I ruined my own. Terrified Sage will get attached and then lose you when reality catches up with whatever this is. Then we'll be terrified together. But we'll be honest about it, no more hiding behind professional distance or assuming we're not worthy of connection. The kiss happened inevitably, gravity pulling them together until lips met in contact that felt both foreign and familiar. 17 years of emotional isolation met 12 years of self-imposed penance. And for a moment the weight of all that history lifted into something lighter. When they broke apart, both breathing harder, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. I wrote you a love song when I was 19, spent 17 years thinking I'd never tell you. And now you get to play me the second movement, Victoria finished. The one that comes after grief and guilt, the one about second chances. Outside the window, snow began to fall again over Manhattan, covering the city in white that would turn gray by morning, but for now created the illusion of fresh starts and clean slates. Two people who'd been carrying separate burdens for too long finally set them down, if only for this moment, and discovered that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone else help carry the weight. The melody of Second Chances played softly in the silence between heartbeats, a song that had taken 17 years to complete, and would continue being written in all the days that followed, one note at a time.